Throughout the years, there have been many different changes that have taken place all around us, and we may not even realize it until we look back years down the road. As we do that, we realize that there are sights, sounds, and experiences that kids will never know about. In this video, we will have a look back at some of the things that kids will never experience. Kids today will never experience telephones the way we used to. For starters, they were big and there was no way you were ever going to lose that thing. These phones had real bells inside, and if they were older, then they had rotary dials on them. Back then, there was no caller ID, and we happily answered each and every call without knowing who was on the other end. Most people did not have an answering machine until the late 80s or even 90s, so we didn't want to miss that call. These older phones were simply meant for calling someone, and there was no way to send a text or take a photo with them. Speaking of text, the only way that a text could be found was in a book. Any notes or letters of correspondence were generally handwritten. Today, that is definitely something from the past, as many students have never even learned how to write in cursive. Even something as simple as a vacuum was completely different. They came with bags rather than canisters, which was much more of a hassle, and especially so if the bag ever exploded. What a mess! None of us could ever imagine the day when we would see a Roomba. Most all of us in Generation X and before understood how life was before the personal computer became so prominent. But once it did, we remember how it was a little bit more of a challenge than what it is today. Do you remember booting up a computer off of a floppy disk? Or how about using dial-up? Kids today would never have the patience to get through that, and even worse was downloading something. That could take several minutes or even hours. Back then, spam was just a product that could be found in a can. When we traveled in cars, we had to take turns picking the radio station for us all to listen to. Remember hearing the static between stations? We were lucky if we had an 8-track player or cassette tape player, but either way, we certainly did not have the luxury of our very own iPod or MP3 player to listen to. Cars have come a long way over the years, and people today are spoiled. Many cars of yesteryear never had power locks or power windows. Some never even had an air conditioner or a radio. Without power steering, turning a car at a stop was virtually impossible. Brakes needed adjustment, and some of the valves on cars did too. But one feature that we all did have in cars was an ashtray and a working cigarette lighter. Those were the small luxuries that we all enjoyed. Even if you did not smoke, the ashtray was an additional place where you could hold your coins, gum, or more. If we wanted to know how to spell something or know the meaning of a word, then we had to consult a dictionary. We certainly couldn't Google it like we can now. Libraries were places to get books rather than a place to use the internet. And remember when you had to use the card catalog? Yeah. Kids today will never know that hassle. Cash and coins were the preferred way of spending money back in the day. Yes, we used checks, and we also had the option of credit cards, but we definitely did not have debit cards. Credit cards were not electronically ran back then. They ran through a credit card slide or imprinter, which would use carbon paper to make the copies that you would sign. Over the years, some candy bars have disappeared, and those that have stuck around have also changed. Remember when Hershey bars came in foil wrappers with the paper that went around them? You could easily slide your finger down the back just to open it. For most of us, this will always be known as Kentucky Fried Chicken and not KFC. It's almost like they are trying to be too fancy without getting fancier. Have you ever asked a kid what a slide rule was? Try it sometime, and I promise you'll enjoy the confused look on their face. But for us, it was a necessity unless it was test time. Then you were not allowed to use that or a calculator. Learning your times tables was an essential way to make math easier. No matter who you were, you always had a map or an atlas with you in your car. This was especially true if you were traveling on a trip. Getting lost was real, and occasionally you'd have to stop and ask for directions. Now that everyone has GPS on their phones, they'll have no idea what that entailed. If you were into sports and you wanted to stay up to date with the latest highlights, then you tuned into the nightly news to catch the 5-minute sports segment. No one wanted to wait for the paper to come out the next day, and we certainly could not look it up on our phones like we can now. If you were into watching movies at the theater, then having a newspaper was useful. They had sections that would tell you everything that would be playing at your local movie theater or drive-in. Later on, we got a little spoiled when we could call in and listen to a recorded message listing the playtimes. If you missed the showtime or came in on the call late, then you would have to wait and listen to all the movies and showtimes to roll back around. Once the VCRs came on strong in the 1980s, the video rental stores became a huge part of our lives. We all traveled down to these on Friday and Saturday nights to look for the latest and greatest movies to watch. Loading film into a camera was somewhat of a skill to have, and especially so if you wanted to maximize the number of photos you could take. Some cameras, such as the 110, disc, or APS, made that process a little easier. But one thing that they did not simplify was the fact that you needed to have your film developed. That process may have taken 2 weeks, but later on we all got spoiled with the 1-hour processing. The only possible way that we could instantly see our photos was with the Polaroid camera. Even that wasn't as instant as digital cameras and cell phones are today. Talk about spoiled. Remember how shopping used to be? It was only available during the day, Monday through Saturday. If it was after closing time, then it was going to have to wait until the next day. Getting gas was the same way, and so was banking. When the ATM card hit the market, we all thought it was the greatest thing ever. You mean I can do a little banking business after hours? Most people who use computers today will never understand having to use DOS or hear the scream of a dot matrix printer. Wi-Fi has pretty well killed the need for wires being hooked up to a computer other than for a charge cord. Something else that kids will never experience is how and where video games are played. Most are played on phones or on video game consoles at home. But there was a time when kids spent all of their extra money in the arcades at the mall or in some pizza place. They will never understand why kids would place their quarters on the console as they watch someone play the game. Time is a funny thing. It passes by and we never really notice it until it's years later. At that point, we realize that there are many things that have changed and will never be the same. What are some of the things that you experienced that kids today never will? Let us know in the comments below. As always, thank you so much for watching.